Welcome to Voices for Mental Health, the podcast where we engage in real-life talk about mental health and share personal experiences from everyday people, mental health peers, and experts in the field. I'm your host, Candace Schoner, along with my co-host, Carrie Kerwick, and today we will be talking with Amanda Miller about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is not a recognized mental health diagnosis, but it refers to persistent feelings of self-doubt and fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite evidence of competence and success. I think many of us can relate to this topic or this feeling, and I know I have. Welcome, Amanda, to the podcast.
Hi, so nice to talk to you guys again.
Yeah, I should say welcome back because we did a previous interview on another topic and you were just full of information and experiences.
I'm gonna have to believe you on that one, even though my brain tells me otherwise. But yeah, thank you.
Classic example of imposter syndrome there.
Right.
So, when did you start thinking that you might have imposter syndrome, and how did it affect your career and your personal life?
It wasn't something that I even knew was a thing until I was in my 20s. I was in therapy. I had recently experienced a really traumatic loss. And I was, just going through a really hard time. And I kept, when I was in therapy, I would put myself down and kind of, dismiss things that were being said to me about how good I was doing and everything. And my therapist would ask me if I had ever heard of imposter syndrome. I was like, no, I've never heard that term in my life. But I remember just being like, man, another diagnosis that I don't that I don't want. And they were like, no, because it's not an actual diagnosis. It's just kind of something that can occur because of things that you've experienced or your upbringing, different traumas and things like that. And so I was like, oh, wow. And ever since that point, I've become more aware that it's something that I've probably experienced most of my life. I just didn't have a word for it. I didn't have a term for it. So yeah, it affects really your everyday life. And I think a lot more people probably suffer from this than they realize, just because it's not, like you said, it's not an actual diagnosis. It's not a recognized diagnosis. It's more like a sidecar to other things that could happen.
I like the analogy of sidecar.
Right, that's great. That's great. So are there any recurring situations or say trigger for, a word to use that bring up those kind of feelings for you? New situations, new relationships, doubting how much you mean to someone, or when, say, someone compliments you, do you, think that they're just being nice?
Somebody complimenting me is like my worst, the worst thing for me. If anybody, and it doesn't matter, it can be somebody complimenting something about me physically or intellectually or professionally. I automatically do not believe anything that you say to me, and I try, it's not for lack of wanting praise. It's really just, you have those experiences to where you're constantly put down, and you tend to start to believe it. And so that internal voice in your head says they're lying to you. So really for me, I think the biggest trigger for me is if I'm within a group of people that, I want to like me for whatever reason, whether that's, my partner's family or a friend of a friend, like thinking of just, peer groups. And then professionally speaking, when I talk with people who are, my professional peers, I want to be well liked within my community.
Right.
But I often feel like I'm going to be dismissed because maybe I'm not as smart or as well achieved as other people, even though realistically that's not exactly true. But I think that it is sometimes.
It is a complex subject because, like I said, it's not a medical diagnosis per se, a mental health diagnosis, but I think we all have self-doubt. And then the complexity of, like, if you're a overachiever like I think I am, and you think you're doing great, but then that self-doubt just creeps into the brain. And so much of what happens with our mental health is what we think and tell ourselves and what other people say.
Your own narrative.
Your own narrative,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm wondering, you recall your childhood or growing up and what that narrative was for you, and was it a good or negative experience?
I had, kind of a rough early childhood that kind of shaped, I think, a lot of that for me. My upbringing, I had a very strong upbringing, but early on in life, and they say that a lot of your development of your self-worth is actually developed within like the first 3 years of your life. You kind of develop those personal attachments and everything. And so at that point in my life was kind of rough. So that's kind of shaped, I think, that framework of thinking for me, even though my experiences after that point were mostly positive. I had a very supportive family. We talked before, off topic, just talking. I did a lot of musical theater. I've learned to play several instruments, and I sing, and I've done all this stuff. And my family was very supportive. I was high achieved in those things. I received excellent and superior ratings playing multiple instruments and singing growing up. And even though I had those achievements and I could see the tangible output of it, I had awards, and I still would tell myself, there's somebody out there that's definitely better than you, and you don't really deserve these things. And nobody was telling me that.
I mean, that's interesting because I'm thinking of two things, and I'll go with the first thing, which was Barbara Streisand, who has performance anxiety. And everybody, I think, would say she is one of the best singers of all time. I know she's one of my favorites, not to mention her directing and acting and all of that. And then the second part, I don't know if there was a question there, but it may be a statement. The question would be, like, I asked you before we got on to recording the podcast if you did karaoke, and you said, I'll let you finish that.
I used to. Yeah, and I would have a great time doing it. And then I had, unfortunately, at a certain point in my life, I was in a relationship that was abusive, verbally and mentally. And so that kind of broke down my self-esteem in that aspect. And I have not been able to make any kind of music since that point.
Wow. So do you find yourself kind of sitting back in a situation and with the ability to take those thoughts captive and change that narrative, or differentiate between that imposter voice and your authentic voice?
Great question.
That is a really good question. It is hard to do because they're both my thoughts, So I am able to look at these things and say, I know that I can do this. But at the same time, I'm always going to have that voice in the back of my head, whether or not I'm able to rein it in or not. I'm still always going to have that voice that says, yeah, you can do it, but why would you? Nobody's going to like it. Nobody's going to care. And at a certain point, people are going to realize that you're not as great as they think you are.
Typically, I'm curious about your response, your typical response externally and internally when those self-doubts come up about your abilities and achievements. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I have developed, and it's kind of a coping mechanism. I will kind of joke things off, and I'm working on not doing that. I try, if somebody compliments me, I try to just say thank you. But internally, sometimes I'm just like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever you say. Even though, for example, if somebody were to compliment something physically, like, oh my gosh, your hair looks amazing today, I my initial reaction would be like, thanks, I grew it myself, or oh, I brushed it today, just kind of laughing off um the compliment rather than just saying thank you, because I'm just like, okay, why? Why why are you being nice to me?
I see Carrie nodding her head, and I can say that I can personally relate to that as well because for most of my life I used humor to not think about my emotions and to hopefully have people like me because I was funny. And I've learned through therapy after many, many years to not use humor and be self-deprecating because then it affects you emotionally long term. So Carrie, did you have a question?
I was just going on the hair thing, I mean, I call this a natural disaster area, right? I've got a big lion's mane. So yes, I do get a lot of compliments on it, and I just don't know why. So yes, I use humor.
Got it.
Yeah.
What other strategies have you embodied to manage, I guess, the stress of being or thinking about having the imposter syndrome?
I have to, kind of take a step back sometimes and really take stock of the things that I've been able to achieve. Because the voice telling me that I haven't achieved anything is so loud, sometimes I have to really take a step back and say, okay, pause. You've received this and this award. You have 3 degrees. You're a business owner. You're homeschooling 2 children, which honestly is quite the task in itself on top of everything else. You've achieved more than you think you have. Your brain is lying to you.
You talked about going to therapy, and I'm wondering, are you still in therapy, or even if you're not, when this came up, what did your therapist, do you recall what her advice was or his advice?
My therapist was very honest with me, and I don't see that therapist anymore. But at the time, I just remember her being very blunt about it. She was like, "This is something that you're always going to have to deal with because of the things that you have experienced in your life, and you really just have to reframe your thinking. That's the only way that you're going to get through this, or you're going to actually get to the point where you start to alienate yourself from people." And I really took that to heart because that was a fear for me, is not being liked. And then the thought of the fact that the reason that I'm not going to be liked is because I don't like myself. I was like, wow, okay, that made sense. And so I have since really put in that effort to, and it may not always come through, and some days it takes a little more effort than others. I really had to make an effort to kind of mute that voice in my head.
So right now you have a couple of things that you're working on. I know that we talked to you about being a death doula. What are some of the other ways that you are working and having a job?
Well, yeah, I do work as a death doula. I also am working with a professor to work on building case studies for people who are also studying to go into end of life care. And that was a whole other monster to deal with, having, somebody that I looked up to, a professor that I had, to contact me and say, I would love to have you as a co-instructor to help me. I was like, why? Why me? And so again, I had to take a step back and say, okay, the quality of your work shows.
Exactly.
Just take the compliment.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean,
do
that's a huge compliment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was in shock for a while, and then I kind of went through a stage of disbelief. I was just like, I don't know. And my best friend, I was, speaking to her about it, and she was like, do you see now how smart you are, and people see it? And I'm like, but do they? Do they really? Am I really? Or is this, are they trying to just catch me in a lie? Do they think that I'm faking it, and they're using this as a ploy to catch me?
I'm going to ask both of you and Carrie this question. What do you feel about the statement that people make, fake it till you make it? And you want to go first, and then Carrie, I'll ask Carrie to answer it.
That's every day for me. That's every day for me. Yeah, sometimes I really do have to, put on this fake facade, this fake personality of, I believe in myself and you should believe in yourself. And I do think that everybody should believe in themselves, except for me. Because, and I think Carrie probably understands where I'm coming from too, because we've talked about this, and it's every day.
Absolutely. Yes. So fake it till you make it. Okay. You can apply that in so many ways, right?
Absolutely.
So, but as far as imposter syndrome, yeah, I mean, there's times where I've accomplished much and then I just don't feel like I deserve that accomplishment, or that the success was attributed to maybe, I was just in the right place at the right time. It was all about luck, or maybe I'm a perfectionist, and so, I knock it out until it works, right? I keep at it. So it wasn't about me and my abilities. It was just about consistency or persistence and luck, just a lot of luck thrown in there.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean,
yeah, perfectionism and overachievement and things like that are definitely things that are usually attributed to people that have imposter syndrome, because it's almost like we have to be really, really good at things to make ourselves believe that we've actually achieved anything. It's not necessarily that we want to convince other people, is that we want to convince ourselves.
I would say that because that has been my biggest struggle for most of my life, until I was working with somebody on some graphic design project, and they were the printing house, and they basically said to me, no one is going to notice what you notice about the work. It's good enough. You're slowing the process down. You're costing us money. Just let it go. And I'm like, oh my God, that sort of made sense, but I still wanted it to be perfect. And it's not like I haven't made mistakes before. But I thought, yeah, perfectionism, as Carrie was saying, really can slow you down. It can also make you self-doubt yourself, at least from my perspective. And so I don't know if that's the healthiest way to live. And it can also give you imposter syndrome, apparently.
right, if it's not perfect, it's just not good enough. It's not good enough. Yeah.
Have you ever talked to peers or mentors about your experiences with imposter syndrome?
Yes, I think it's an important conversation to have, especially if it's, somebody that you're going to be working closely with, or somebody that you have a close relationship with, just so that they can understand. For example, my best friend, we had, similar kind of upbringings and life experiences. She also has imposter syndrome. So it's something that her and I can talk about. And so she's a big support system for me, as I am for her. We know that we can lean on each other in those moments. You kind of get into this downward spiral. And I know that I can reach out to her and we can talk about these things, and she's going to understand. On another side of that, I remember a time when I had a conversation with my partner who had no idea what imposter syndrome was and didn't understand, and just thought that I was kind of like a negative perfectionist, I think. And after we had the conversation, it was like, okay, wow, I understand more about what that internal voice is telling you. And then professionally speaking, it's a little bit harder to juggle, having that conversation, because you don't want to seem like a weak link, and you
Correct.
don't because you have that fear of people not accepting you or not thinking that you're good enough. So it's kind of hard to have that conversation with your, professional peers. But it's still important to do that just so that they understand and maybe can kind of navigate how they speak to you. Instead of saying, hey, this isn't exactly good enough, they can say, this is really great work. Maybe let's change this one thing to be a little bit better, because positive speak to somebody with imposter syndrome is going to be a lot better and a lot more productive than, with everybody,
Right. Yeah,
when you speak
absolutely.
negatively,
Yeah.
when you speak negatively with anybody, it's going to definitely affect them negatively. But with somebody who is suffering with imposter syndrome, it can kind of trigger one of those downward spirals to where, okay, well, this wasn't good enough, so I'm not good enough.
Do you look at small victories? Do you ever take that into account, or do you have daily habits?
Kind of like building resiliency, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Little victories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, tiny little victories. And some days that can be, I made a phone call. I talked on the phone. I'm a big kid now. I made myself an appointment. And, some days it's, little things like I got out of bed, I brushed my teeth, I did this. And, you know, because sometimes it really does feel like you've done absolutely nothing. Just taking a look at, the little things that you've done throughout the day can really kind of help boost your own internal morale.
I can relate. I have that problem because I always want to have something that I accomplish. And when I don't get something done, I feel very badly about myself.
Yes.
And I know it's not a healthy state of mind, but I think it's part of the A-type personality, part of residuals from my childhood of not being good enough. And I think that's also why I feel like I have imposter syndrome, because I'm always trying to project the best of myself. And I always hesitate to take the credit for it. Now, when you have partners like Carrie, who's the co-host with the mostest,
Right.
who is, we constantly work together to kind of keep each other confident and build up, because this is not an easy task sometimes. I love doing what we do. I love drawing attention. I think it's so critical to draw attention to mental health. And we know that millions of people out there are struggling. And without getting into politics, I think there's more and more people struggling currently in 2025.
Right. And you mentioned positive speak, right? So one thing we were talking about when you were talking to your friend, or that you were saying when you were talking to your friend, is it kind of reminded me of how I used to really seek validation from people. And even though it didn't really help as much, but it was still something that I was receiving, and to validate that I was actually doing something. It was still hard to receive, but it was something, right? So I used to seek validation. And
you don't anymore?
I not as much, but it's nice to provide it, right? It's nice to provide
I seek validation, and you give it to me all the time, so I appreciate it.
But I feel like I've been able to find my self-worth in other areas now. It's been tough, but I've been able to do that in my little accomplishments that I'm making in school, in work, in play, in relationships. And so I'm able to take those negative thoughts captive and replace it with the positive speak that you're talking about. And but self-validation, that's nice, and validation coming from other people is nice. It's always good to give, and it's always great to receive.
I've got a question for you. I think you probably are going to respond to her statement about that, but do you seek validation from other people? And how important is it for you from a business standpoint to get it from coworkers or family or friends?
I don't, and I'm going to agree with Carrie on this. I don't seek validation as much as I used to. I definitely went through a period, like I said, I was in like a really rocky, rough relationship for a while, and that kind of drove me to seek out that validation that I was craving because I wasn't getting it. And now, not so much. And I think everybody does seek validation to a certain extent every day. You know, we want to be recognized for the things that we're doing right. But I do find it more important, like you said, to validate other people's experiences. And I think the best way that I can put it is, if you have to seek that validation from the people in your life, maybe those aren't the best people to have in your life. You know, it's really hard to tend to a thriving garden when it's full of a bunch of weeds. And it's hard to say, and it's tough to process, but maybe if your personal experience is that you're not getting out of people what you're putting into them, maybe that's not the best person to be around.
For me, the validation is mostly from my family, because I don't feel like I need it from my business or my coworkers or my friends, because I just don't feel like I need it from them. Maybe because they give it to me.
It's automatic.
It's automatic.
Yeah.
So we have about 35 seconds left. So is there anything else that, Amanda, that you would like to share with the audience, and maybe to help somebody else who is suffering from imposter syndrome?
Maybe they don't even know that this is something that they're suffering from. You know, like for me, that was my first time hearing it, was when somebody said it to me. So if it's your first time hearing about this, or even if it's not, and you are questioning if maybe this is something that you are experiencing, the thoughts inside your head, your brain is lying to you, for one, but your experience is also extremely valid. And you should applaud yourself for the tiny things every day that you're doing just to get through, because realistically, right now, we're all just doing the best that we can to survive.
That is a great note to end
Well
this
said.
podcast. Well said.
Yep.
Thank you to Amanda Miller. Thank you to my co-host, Carrie Kerwick.
Thank you, Candace.
To our engineer, David Dillahunt, and all the people who are following us and listening to this podcast. And remember, you are not alone.